I was just having a little listen to your latest track that you've just released.
Oh yeah,
just before you.
that was my treat to myself when I hit 5:30. I decided to post that.
Nice. Yeah. How long have you had that in the oven? How long have you been working on that?
Literally, I worked at it yesterday.
Nice. It sounds really good.
I had a burst of inspiration. Oh, cheers! I had a burst of inspiration Sunday morning. Just sort of woke up, and I think it's because I'd had a conversation the day before. I don't know what had made that come into my mind at that point, but I was just saying something I have not done much lately is just creative outlets and all that kind of stuff. And I really need to just get back on making music. I haven't done that in ages. And so probably because I'd had that conversation, but then also I don't know why I had that conversation. So there must have been something stirring.
The universe guiding you, man. All that hippie shit.
Yeah, the cosmos.
Destiny.
I just woke up Sunday morning with just a real burning desire to make songs. So just sat down, and it's kind of another one added to the kind of UK club sounds of the catalogue. All these taking influence from Chicago footwork again, which I've probably rambled about for. I imagine, I don't know, but
I'm not sure actually. I feel like it's not actually come up directly.
Oh, ideal. Well, I've not talked about it on the podcast, I don't think, at the very least.
Yeah. So, you've definitely ambled about it to me, in the multiple hours we're in the car in New Zealand together, because I think we listened to a little bit of it.
Yeah, quite possibly. It's
in terms of the podcast universe, it's completely fresh. It's not canon.
Ideal.
You can.
I've almost just had that feeling that Charlie and David got, where you just suddenly remember that you're that you're being recorded and these words could.
No, but they can't though. They can't come back to haunt you because
That's true.
They can just get deleted.
Easily edited. I think it's just
as I had to do with Charlie and David, because we recorded for 3 hours, so I couldn't keep it all. I do have I've got it chunks that I took out saved in case because it's nice to I don't just get rid. The bits I do get rid of is when there's lots of pauses or or anything like that. But the big chunks of conversation, some of which is just too private to share, and some of which it's just it's not relevant enough to keep in. But I do just keep them because it's just nice to have those as bonus little bits of audio and stuff like that. Yeah. But even if it's just for us to come back to in a couple of years' time and be oh god, yeah, we chatted bollocks, because with the Charlie and David one, for example, there's a good 20 minutes before the episode even starts, really, where we're just like having a catch up, basically having a chinwag. And usually I'd include that, but like
didn't have the time.
Because their whole playlist bit was so like all encapsulating of the stories and stuff. I thought we'll just start at the intro, I guess. So, which I thought worked pretty well.
It worked really well. Honestly, it was one of my favorites. That listening through that, it's just I guess it was a little shake up of the format as well, while still keeping with all the sort of core themes and principles. So it's
very much
really
like
nice.
A special edition, like a Top Gear special when they go to Africa.
Yeah,
but with us, it was get some people on to talk about a road trip playlist. Get them to do all the talking essentially, and we just sit there with massive grins on our face, like listening to the stories.
it was a proper beaming kind of like no, that was good. It was good fun making, good fun listening. Okay. Gather my thoughts. I think the other reason was I think the other reason for suddenly becoming aware of it was because of my pre-air rant. I think which I think it's okay to acknowledge that I had a pre-air rant about work. I don't think that's too incriminating.
Just letting off some steam.
Yeah, just one of those days. Footwork. So yeah, footwork is that's like my go-to for. I mean, one of the sort of themes we touched upon a little bit, just in everyday life, but also on the podcast, is like that idea of music's ability to completely shake you up and sort of just these completely new sounds that take you aback and make you think in new ways and imagine new possibilities. And there's a sort of like political aspect to that as well, with people like Mark Fisher sort of talking about that aspect of music. But footwork for me was like one of the last big sounds that like fully had that effect for me. The moment I heard it, it was just like, what even is this? This is just unlike anything I've ever come across before, and essentially it comes from Chicago and sort of is like a spin-off of Ghetto House, which was like in itself like a spin-off from just Chicago House, and it's like repetitive melodic samples, often like repetitive battle cry like snippets of vocals, and then just these incredibly scattery drum beats, fast-paced rhythms on an 808 drum machine. So sort of like America's answer to jungle, and there are now people like DJing with the two, like Sherelle in London does incredible sets. Her Boiler Room set is insane, and like she does incredible sets where it's like sort of morphing those two genres, both like about 160 to 180 BPM. The rhythm suddenly, becomes the center, like all out. Like I guess with some electronic genres, obviously rhythm is always central, pretty much, but there's often like a melodic focus as well. I think with Footwork and Jungle, rhythm really takes the forefront, and it's the rhythmic complexity a lot of the time. But the Footwork I just find so exciting, and the other thing is it's got this like punk spirit because it is on such simple software. It is literally just an 808 machine. An 808 machine and a sampler, like you're sort of sorted.
I was going to ask, are you still making these tracks on the kind of same setup that you were doing at uni? So was it like Audacity and LMMS?
Yeah, and LMMS. Like, so I was having a conversation. I met up with Arthur the other day, and
nice.
in keeping with our celebrity theme, Arthur.
Well, he's a celebrity.
Yeah, he's a celebrity in himself, actually. That's a good point. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Arthur, who himself makes music, and he has his own sort of studio space now, and that's proper like the career he's going into. So
is
you're
his
right.
band called Lily Brings the Weather, or is that just his like sister's?
No, that's him and his brand, sister, right? I think.
Yeah,
but I think like more so him in it, or like it might become his kind of. Or at least like it was project. For a while. Like I don't think it was. I think there were some tracks that weren't, didn't have his sister on, but I didn't
want to be like, oh, it's his band, and then it turned out to be his sister, and he just produces. But yeah.
I'm immediately regretting. Like Arthur can call us out if he ever listens to this.
Did you mention that we've started doing this to him?
I didn't actually, but I'm wishing I did.
We should get him on
about music and stuff. We should actually. He would be a really good guest to have on.
He could talk to us about like producing and like running a studio and all that kind of stuff. Like,
I'd be class, to be fair. Yeah, that'd be really interesting.
We'll try to reach out.
He's the one who got me into Talk, who I've mentioned a few times.
Oh, yeah.
I'd seen their name all over the place, but he was like, when somebody pushes you over the edge, like, so you're like, I've just heard this too many times now. Yeah. And he was just like, yeah, you really got to do it.
He was your tipping point.
You can hear their influence, I think, in some of the Lily Brings the Weather stuff, especially. But yeah, anyway, long story short, basically Footwork has then gone on to influence like a whole series of some of my tracks in the last, I don't know, year, 2 years. I just love those scattery rhythms and the fact that you can do it on really basic equipment, which is very much what I have. And part of its charm is its sort of rough and ready feel. And I've been trying to put like quite UK spins on it. So been doing a lot of 140 BPM, which is like the grime BPM.
Oh, nice.
And sort of using quite sort of UK samples a lot of the times. Like I've sort of sampled like Skepta before. On this, I'm sampling Marky Smith from The Fall talking about his drinking habits. I
was going to ask you where the sample is from.
Yeah, it's Marky Smith, and interestingly, when you because I've slowed it down a bit and sort of deepened it a bit, and he starts to sound a bit brummy, actually.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I was like, oh, you found like some niche little like brummy show or something.
Yeah,
and I thought you grabbed, because it's a great line for a sample. Like it works really nicely.
Yeah. If you're gonna drink, put it on the table.
Yeah.
Nothing worse than a secret drinker. Yeah, it's classic Marky Smith, that. But yeah, no, who'd have thought it? If you slow down a Manc accent, make it a bit deeper, it sounds like a brummy drawl. That's my discovery of the weekend.
Where do you get the the cover art, I guess it is. Where's the cover art from?
Oh, so it's from Crazy Cat, which is basically like the original creative American comic, I suppose.
Right.
So like, those, all the tradition of Sunday cartoons and all that kind of stuff in America, and you get it here as well. But very much like the comic that then started to carve out space for it to be considered almost like an art form. So basically, like people like, is it Charles Schultz, the Snoopy writer anyway, and Bill Watson, the Calvin and Hobbes writer, like all influenced by Crazy Cat. Back when I was doing my dissertation, I think for my masters, I think when I'm like, I mean, I'm already obsessive sometimes as it is, but when I'm like in a real like focused headspace and I start to go a bit mad, I get really, really obsessive over things, and I got really deep into a Crazy Cat rabbit hole. And I just quite like, I've got like one of the books, and I just like taking some of the images sometimes and using them as the album covers. I think they're just really quite striking images.
They are, yeah,
and quite just fun and goofy.
It's absolutely a vibe, and it really fits with like the latest like spurt of tracks. I don't know if spurt's the right word.
We'll go with spurt.
We'll go with spurt. I think, to be fair, I think you've always been quite good. It's something that I don't know if I said it out loud when we were talking with Charlie and David last time, but I was going to say to Charlie that like she's always really good at picking really interesting like cover photos for her playlists. Yeah, and I think you are as well. And you're also, I always feel like whenever I see you drop a track, I'm always really excited to see what the track is, and then also what the cover image you've chosen is. Because like you and Charlie both have this ability to either take photos or find photos that are just like really cool and quirky and like unique. You know what? And I'm always there like I don't even know where I'd start, like where I'd even begin to find like any of these kind of pictures.
I'm pretty sure I've nicked that habit from Charlie, and the long playlist name titles. I'm pretty sure I nicked from Anna.
Really?
I've given up on coming up with celebrity names now, but yeah, but so basically, like I think I was fully inspired by like other people, and then I've just sort of tried to do my own thing with it. I kind of love that the sort of coming up with playlist titles and images becomes like an art form in itself.
It absolutely does, because you've got to convey the right vibe, right?
Yeah, and it actively sets a vibe sometimes just from that alone. Like, and once you've got, I mean, this is me just bullshitting with this here, but I feel like once you've got that title and that image, like it then allows you to have these playlists that like, well, I think for me, like I just have they're playlists for on the go, and it's so many genres that you're throwing together, and without that, it would just feel a complete hodgepodge and mess. But somehow when I add the title and image,
it makes sense of it.
It makes it feel like there's some coherence when there is none, really.
Yeah. I don't really make playlists as often these days. Actually, I say that I don't make playlists at all really anymore. I've just kind of fallen out of that habit, which I kind of miss.
Discover new tunes, like, or is it more just?
I just kind of like so I have a playlist that's like, oh, listen to all of these things, and when I listen to them, and if I like them, they all go into a playlist called "Been Listening to Anything Good Recently." That is like a complete hodgepodge of like everything, and they're in there almost as like a holding playlist for when I want to then turn them into. But I've not made like a specific. Whereas back, I used to like take
that was your talent
in making playlists and stuff, and like I tried to do that same
park
thing.
Days, that was like you could always rely on like a good playlist. That's
so I always had like I'd set like the same as like what you were saying, that you set a title, set an image. So I had vibing out, and then I got a picture of some of my mates looking very hungover, which they were in Budapest. And then that's just like very kind of vibey, slow, chill songs. But again, it was made in like 2018, so maybe it's a little bit like
summer. I feel like you're a summer playlist person. Is that like
maybe?
Because that's what I associate. I associate a Louis playlist with like.
I think one of the things. I think one of the aspects of it is like I like to take my time doing it and know exactly what I'm putting in it almost, and then it grows from there. But I like to know what those first couple of songs are. And as like life is at the minute, I feel like I've just not had the time, and it's definitely been affected by the fact that I've transferred from being more of a I used to be like purely a playlist listener, and I've transferred over to be more of an album listener. So a lot of the times when I'm listening to like a song, I'm like, oh, I just want to listen to something that's in the same kind of energy as this, or in the same kind of area is this? And shockingly enough, most of the time, that if you just listen to one album, if you listen to the album, it's all of the same energy or message or vibe. So I think that's kind of why, but it's mostly just time, because I like when I was at uni, I put a lot of time into making these, like you say, like a summer playlist. I had one, the English summer, which is the one that we put on.
I was thinking about that one.
Every single like beach trip, every single park trip, basically, and I just continuously added summery vibe songs to that one, to the point where it is now probably too big, because it's like 17, 18 hours long, which you don't really know it's going to be in a park for 18 hours.
That's what you want. You want, like, I love those playlists that become almost like an infinite radio. Obviously not infinite, but sort of.
That's true, yeah.
Like you just play it and you're always going to get new songs. Like, maybe you should, you might have to link that in, because I like, as an into the episode description, because A, that is a classic, and B, I'm definitely starting to feel some of those, well, not quite summer, but the spring vibes are in full
Yeah,
swing.
the sun's coming out, the sky's a little bit bluer.
Good. Yeah, it's lovely.
It is funny that we've like naturally got onto this conversation, because I was actually planning on bringing all this kind of stuff up when we got into Flower Boy, because I was going to talk about how a lot of the songs on it just ended up integrating into like various playlists, and there's quite a few of them that do end up in the English summer.
Yeah, that fits. I mean, actually, no. I'll pause before making any more comments on Flower Boy. We've still got more catching up to do. How are you doing, Louis? You've had I've rambled for a while. I feel. What's going on? What's occurring?
Like smoothly linking up from the fact that me saying I've been too busy for making playlists. I've been very busy. I've done this thing where, like, at the start of, I think I just hit a point maybe in February when I was like, right, I need to fill up my year with things to look forward to. Because, you know, when you're in February blues, you're like, right, well, let's like book a bunch of stuff in to look forward to. And I like having things like on the calendar. So I've just had like back-to-back weekends of being away. So I went to Belfast for St. Patrick's Day, which is like 3 weekends ago now.
That's sick.
That's when after, I think we recorded with Charlie and David like the Monday after I got back from that. But I can't remember if I really touched on it or not. And then after that weekend was London, which is where I saw you on the Friday, where we all got together for a party.
Oh, that was quite recent then.
Yes.
I'm losing track of the time.
I know it's flying past. That's the thing. Like, so Belfast, like Paddy's Day in Belfast, then a weekend in London, where party on the Friday. On the Saturday, we went and had a little nosy around Battersea Power Station, which was interesting. And then I rushed off to go see a gig at Ali Pali, which was absolutely class, to be honest. Went to see a band called Don Broco, who no one knows who I'm talking about when I mention them, but the people who do know that they've got some absolutely banging tunes, and they're one of those bands that's just like an incredible live experience, because the whole crowd is just moving. Like, they don't have any songs that, like, I'd say they might have one or two slower songs, but the majority of it is very like energetic. So like you are jumping up and down and moshing and dancing for like the whole show, to be honest. And they're just like incredible performers, you know. Like, one of them, the lead singer, is there in his kind of like billowy shirt, curly mullet, like just absolutely rocking out at the front. Yeah, he's got the full look. And yeah, they're just really like class, high energy kind of. I'm not really sure what genre I'd put them in, because every time people ask me, I'm like, kind of like punk rock, heavy. They started off as like indie rock, but they've gone a lot heavier since then, so they're a lot more interesting to listen to. They kind of started off in that kind of indie rock area, and they've evolved out of it. And because they evolved out of it, they've managed to stay like relevant and exciting, and I think they're growing. Whereas a lot of bands that came around the same era have definitely kind of like died out. Like, I don't know if people have heard of like Lower Than Atlantis or anything like that, but they were kind of a similar energy to that kind of thing that came out where everyone listened to them when they were like 16, and then a lot of these bands kind of faded away. But I really feel like Don Brokers, if anything, they're just hitting their stride now. They're just bringing out some really exciting, fun songs, and yeah, one of the really good bands to see live. And then on the Sunday of that weekend in London, I went to Wembley to see England play Ukraine football match. So that was pretty cool. That was just a case of someone at work is one of the England fan club members or whatever it's called. And he gets offered the tickets for every single game, but you have to go to you have to take the tickets. I think it's how it works. You have to take the tickets and go, otherwise they won't offer you the next one.
Yeah,
and he couldn't go because he was doing like a marathon or something like that. So he just like offered them up, like, oh, does anyone want 3 tickets for 75 quid? And I was like, you know what, 25 quid for a ticket and 2 mates go with, like, why not? That kind of opportunity. It's just like, yeah, why not? I'm not the biggest football fan in the world. I do enjoy watching England, but like, it's one of those things where like, well, I'm not going to go to Wembley for any other reason really, and be a good life experience. And went along, 80,000 people there, so it was pretty crazy. Definitely the biggest kind of stadium experience I've ever had. And the first half was a pretty good game of football.
But the second half?
The second half, so in the first half, England went 2-0 up. And then after that point, it became kind of apparent that they'd won. And I think they were all just kind of like, saving themselves for what they see probably as their more important matches in the Premier League and stuff like that.
Yeah, and, plus nobody wants to piss all over Ukraine right now.
I think the Ukraine supporters were really bringing a lot of energy in the first half, and then in the second half, once they were 2-0 down, they were a little bit less excited. But it was still a really, really fun experience.
I was just imagining like everybody sort of cheering every time England score, but then being like, oh yeah, but also Ukraine is still doing well.
I think it's a little bit less like. With the Eurovision Song Contest, I think everyone
full blown.
A little bit more like full blown.
Although
I don't want to say like
the Ukraine band were like pretty good from what I remember. Like they did that whole like I can't really remember. They were like some kind of alternative rap punk thing, weren't they? Can't really remember exactly.
I don't know. I didn't watch it. I don't watch the Eurovision Song Contest.
I seem to remember.
But I think in football, everyone's just there like, oh, we're just here to have a good game of footy. Like that. That's enough on its own to enjoy. I don't think anyone's too I don't think the Ukrainians are there like asking for sympathy or anything like that. I do remember like earlier, like when Wales were playing them for a spot in I think it was the World Cup, and like Wales were like, we're really sorry, but we really need this. and I think they felt bad about beating them, but at the same time, it is just a game of football, and it's a fun distraction in and of itself. And I think it was a good day out for everyone. There were a lot of Ukrainian, because a lot of Ukrainian refugees in London,
so
they did get like a pretty large turnout. And they were bringing so much more energy than the England fans. A lot of the England fans felt like they were just kind of there.
What, to use up their tickets because they had to?
yeah, basically, just there to kind of watch. But it was very cool seeing like players that I've watched on TV lose the Euros and the World Cup in person. And that was pretty neat. Harry Kane was there, Saka was there.
There's a lot of emphasis on the losing there. There's
well, when you're an England football fan,
these guys
implies
giving their all, Louis.
No, I'm not. I'm not taking away from. I think they're a really good team. I'm not throwing any shade. I'm just like, I think there's this thing with like, if you're an England football fan and you're talking to, we might have listeners who are international, and I think international people think that
one person from
we're all dickheads. There's the one person in Japan who listens to this. I'm not sure if they still do.
Religiously.
Our biggest fan is in Japan. And they might think, I think a lot of like Europeans think that, understandably, because I think the stereotypical image of an England football fan is a knobhead. And they think we're really cocky. And they think we're like, oh, it's coming home. They every time we lose, they get really like, ha ha, dickheads, get fucked. And they don't realize that like it's coming home is all like self-deprecating. Yeah, like it's like we know it's not. Like we're kind of hopeful it is. Like a little tiny ember in our core is like, oh, it would be pretty magical. But like it's like shrouded in layer upon layer of. It's not, so we're gonna big it up and like basically have a little bit of a laugh at ourselves. That's kind of the energy that I take away from it as an England fan. But that's why I kind of mentioned like, oh, I've watched them lose twice, just to temper that kind of pride. I've watched them play very, very well on multiple occasions, but ultimately lose. So that was all in one weekend. And then last weekend, the one that's just gone, the one that we've just had, I was down in Sheffield to visit a mate who lives there. And continuing the theme of seeing live sports, I went and saw an ice hockey game, which was like on my bucket list to see. So that was the Sheffield Steelers versus the Glasgow Clan. And Sheffield Steelers won 5-4, which was good because they were home, and there's definitely a home advantage with ice hockey in the UK, because literally, like, anytime a Steelers player scored, they played loads of music, they played the replay, they did the announcement, everyone was like cheering and everything. And then anytime the Glasgow Clan scored, there was nothing. They played like a sad song, and then there was nothing. And then there's just, you could just hear like the Glasgow Clan like cheering. But like, you know, Steelers would score, and like the announcer would be like, "Sheffield Steelers, please cheer your Steelers." And it was like, "Ah!" And then like Glasgow scores, and it's just silence. Like there's no official anything from the tannoy or anything like that. I imagine it's like that in every single like arena across the UK. So if you go to Glasgow, they will announce all the big Glasgow names and wouldn't announce anything that the away team actually do. Like it's quite bizarre, and it's weird as well because it's so Americanized. In part because they don't let up at all. Like it's constant. Like it's just constant. Like music. Like if the game pauses, like for the referee to make a decision or something like that, music gets played, and like you all like clap your hands along, and the cheerleaders are going off in the corner, and then obviously like when the game is playing, you're just listening to the sounds of men like slamming into each other on ice, and everything is sponsored. So like all the players have an individual sponsor.
Wow.
The team is sponsored, the event is sponsored, the arena is sponsored, the penalty zones are sponsored, the sin bins are sponsored. So like if you get a player score, or like you get a player get into a fight and then get sin binned, they read off the player and who the player is sponsored by. They remind you that you're watching the Sheffield Steelers sponsored by Sheffield Windows or some shit like that. They remind you where it is, that it's at the utility arena sponsored by whoever the fuck. The penalty occurred in the penalty zone sponsored by whatever fireplace brand it was.
Terry's all night kebabs.
And then and then they've been sent to the Five Guys sin bin or whatever the fuck. And it's like, I get it because there's nowhere near the amount of funding that like larger sports have. So in a way, they probably do need the sponsorships to like fund it all. But it is a little bit overwhelming. But at the same time,
America, isn't it? It's like,
yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's how I imagine like the NFL, and as well as like the NHL and the NBA even, like all of it. I imagine is just like this just constant chain of adverts and sponsorships and stuff. But really fun to watch because it's very like fast paced. I couldn't figure out the rules. I didn't look up the rules before I went, and I couldn't figure them out.
Are there any?
So fast moving.
Oh, it's so like aggressive. You can just pretty much do anything. Short of like,
yeah, there seems to be a lot of leeway. I specifically couldn't figure out like how the subsystem worked. Like obviously in football, it's like, we'll bring in number 22 off, and we're sending number 17 on, and they do a little jog over to the side and a little high five and a slap on the ass, and then they swap over or whatever. In hockey, there was just players coming off and coming on, like in a constant stream almost.
Right,
like it wasn't apparent who was. It wasn't like, oh, take Billy off and put Jimmy, sponsored by Nachos, on. Like it was just like constant swapping over. But you know, 5-4, lots of goals. So a really entertaining watch, to be fair.
What?
So I can recommend.
What had made you want to do that? Where did that come from?
I think I'm not really sure. To me, I think I had mates who went to Sheffield Uni and Nottingham Uni, and they both have ice hockey teams, and they talked about seeing the ice hockey at various points while they're at university. So I think it always been in the back of my mind.
So it's a bit of a thing there. It's like a bit of a regional thing, is it?
Yeah. So Sheffield and Nottingham, I think, are like the big rivals against each other.
Right. Okay.
They're like the biggest opponents in the sense. Sheffield's biggest opponent is Nottingham in the sense that I think they're fairly close proximity and they play each other fairly regularly. And I think there's like might be wrong about this, but I think there's like a uni team and then there's like a professional team for each of these as well. And I think there's like 8 teams across the UK. So there's like a Belfast team, there's a Glasgow team, Nottingham, Sheffield. I think there probably is a London one.
That's so random. I wonder how that's come about in those like for example, Nottingham is a really random place to be one of only 8 teams in the UK.
Yeah, it is really when you think of it. Yeah, it is odd. I'm not sure what specific. I guess it's just where they could build an ice arena, on where they already had like a ice rink, and then they could like turn it into. But I'm really not entirely sure. I assume as well that they use the arenas for other stuff, like they can just put, chipboard over the ice and use it as a music venue or whatever. But I don't know. I'm glad it exists though, because it is fun to see, and I don't think the standard is anything close to what they might have in America or Canada, because I think people over there, they're born on the ice and then they live out their entire existence there, doing spins and scoring goals and having fights. Where I think most of the Sheffield players are probably, I think they're part time. I don't think they're like the professional sportsmen, but I think it's one of those sports that just doesn't have enough behind it for them to do it full time. So I imagine they're also like plumbers or something, at the same time.
Yeah, I'd imagine.
I'm not sure, but I would say, if you get an opportunity, give it a go. And it has made me. I do want to go again, and it has kind of made me curious to add to the bucket list if I'm ever in the US or Canada to try and find the time to see a full all-out NHL game as well.
I know somebody who plays bike polo, which I also think would just be pretty mad to see at some point. I
have no idea what that is.
Getting even more left field. Well, like polo as in not water polo, but
you ride the horse
polo. Yeah, it's like that, but
right,
you're just cycling around on your bike. But
I love that.
He's like really into it. So yeah.
It is funny when people find their niche sport and it just does it. I've always thought ultimate frisbee is like a weird example of that.
Yeah, I could see myself
it's a very
getting really
specific
into
thing. I could see you getting really into ultimate frisbee,
which I can't. But I guess you learn, don't you?
I could throw or catch or run.
Nah, yeah, I think I would quite enjoy that, to be honest. To be fair, I think somebody I go climbing with used to be quite into that. I don't know whether he does it so much now.
It does feel like the kind of sport a climber would get into.
It feels like it.
I don't know if that sounds derogatory, but like
hacky sack sports.
The climbers are a certain type. Hacky sack sports.
Like where your chances of owning a hacky sack like increase exponentially the more of these sports that you do.
Yeah, if you're the kind of guy who takes a slackline to the park, you know who you are. Like, but yeah, that's been my kind of busy set of weekends so far. The one coming up is the long Easter weekend, so I got like a birthday and stuff like that. But other than that, it's a fairly chill one, which I think I need. I'm ready for a bit of a slower one, because then after that it's a whole nother long list of weekends away, which I'm sure I'll cover again at various podcast episodes in the future. Do you have anything particularly exciting on this weekend?
Not really. I might be going away with Hannah's family, like just for a night, just because they're going off to see Hannah's cousin out in Wales.
Oh, so nice.
It'd be another. If I go along to that, it'll be another member of the family that that I haven't met yet. Obviously, shouldn't be intimidating at this point, but there's still a bit of that.
I think it always will be. As long as they're like completely new and you're there having to go, oh God, I've got to make another first impression.
Yeah, and it's people of significance, isn't it? It's like, I've heard so much about them.
I wonder if it does it feel like it becomes exponentially like, does the pressure increase when you know that they've heard about you, or does it decrease?
Ooh, that's good.
Like, because they'll know, you've been Hannah's partner for quite a long time now.
Decreases.
So they'll know about you.
Sort of not making a pure first impression at that point. You've sort of been vouched for, and so they've almost made their impression of you.
Like, Hannah's put up with him for this long, so he must be okay.
Yes. Yeah, I was actually thinking about you've been vouched for, or have you? Is it? I've always just kind of relied on that one, but you can't guarantee.
Or you're sowing extra seeds of doubt into your mind there.
But should be doing that. But not too much else planned, I don't think. Just looking forward to really enjoying these kind of spring vibes that are coming through. Like the leaves have started to come out on the trees. It's all just sort of it's all happening quite quickly now, and I'm just relieved about it. The days are longer. It's just lovely, really lovely.
We're starting to see some flowers emerge. Some
cropping up all over.
Flower boy.
More
something else entirely.
It's a very springtime album cover, I feel.
It is, yeah.
You've got this lovely orangey warm glow over some, I don't know what state it is, but a US state hills, and then some flowers and bees. It's very
sort of a spring-like sound in general, actually. Like, I hadn't thought about that when listening to it, but it does sort of have a spring vibe, especially the lighter songs, like maybe less so those couple of heavier tracks.
Aggressive ones, yeah. I think for me it is a springtime, summertime album. What we were saying about the El Classique, old school English summertime playlist is there's a lot of Tyler the Creator features in there, because I think for me Flower Boy is like a springtime, summertime, sun's out album kind of vibe. But like you say, there's a couple in there that throw that off a little bit, but I think it's a great album in the sense that it works. I don't know if you felt this when you were listening to it, but every time I re-listen to it, it has a really nice kind of flow to it. And I think it has that a little bit of a storytelling element to it, and the songs merge together really nicely. So even though there is like a couple of what are almost like kind of older school Tyler aggressive songs on there, they fit into the flow really nicely. But I wouldn't put them on the same playlist. I wouldn't put them on the summer playlist necessarily. There's someone here that I throw into like a gym playlist, for example, but the flow definitely works.
Yeah, I think like a cohesive album doesn't necessarily need to be all the same sounding, and in fact actually it being all the same sounding can
be boring.
Yeah, and therefore lose that kind of cohesion. It sounds like you've just thrown a lot of songs together that sound similar. Well, more like a playlist almost, whereas like an album should be a bit more of a journey, I suppose.
I think we're kind of in like dangerous territory for me this episode.
Okay,
because Tyler the Creator is one of only two artists that I can say confidently go in my top 3 personal favorite artists.
Wait, you've only got 2 artists in your top 3?
So this, right? I'll explain my logic.
Get the logic, I think.
I'll explain my logic in a second. I promise it makes sense. Well, it doesn't necessarily make sense, but it kind of makes sense in my kind of line of thinking. But I do feel like I'm gonna, however this episode goes, I'm gonna think of other things I wish I'd have said posthumously. I don't know if that's the right word to say, like after this podcast has died. But Tyler has other projects that I'm sure we can come around to again in the future. In years' time, years to come. But in terms of the top 3 logic, basically, I think most people like to think about like, oh, what are my top 10 artists? What are my top 5? And then, like what are my like very, very top 3, I guess. And I don't want to say top 2 because that just doesn't feel right, Top 3, it has more of like a well-renowned ring to it. Like, things come in threes, human-like patterns of 3. It works. But the thing is, I have so many artists vying for that number 3 spot. And I feel like they change a lot. Like sometimes I'm really feeling, I don't know, sometimes I can be really feeling Kendrick Lamar. Sometimes I can be really feeling Fleet Foxes. Like the mood can change, like which artist kind of sits in that spot. And I don't feel comfortable like saying in absolutes, this artist belongs in my top 3.
Shouldn't it just be a top 5 then?
No, because I don't even feel comfortable putting the other 3 in. Like they can be, there's a lot of fluctuation there. So my top 5, I can say like I have a top 5, but that top 5 will change whenever you ask me. But I'm confident in saying that both Tyler the Creator and Gorillaz will always be in my top 5, and by extension will always be in my top 3. I don't know if they'll always necessarily be the top 1 and 2 spot, but they are. Do you see?
I do see that.
Logic
there is a sort of twisted logic of sorts.
There's method to the madness. Although I guess if somebody was to more casually ask me like, "Oh, what are your top 3 artists?" I'd probably just give whichever artist is currently sat at number 3. But it's too hard to pick a definitive one. But I feel like I can confidently put Tyler up there because every single time I come to his music, specifically his latest stuff, but we can get into that in a bit, it always just hits. It just hits for me every single time. And I can listen to Flower Boy, I can listen to Ego, I can listen to Call Me If You Get Lost, just like back to back on repeat and just enjoy every listen. Like it never gets stale for me. Whereas some artists, I kind of go through phases of, yeah, I want to listen to this in the winter time or in the summertime, or when I'm feeling happy or when I'm feeling sad, or this is just a gym kind of thing. Like, yeah, I think Death Grips are sick, but I don't always want to listen to Death Grips. But I can always find a Tyler song, or even just put on like the whole album and just guarantee enjoy it. Like, I've got Flower Boy on vinyl, and it's one of the ones where sometimes you're like, oh, I fancy listening to something on vinyl, and Flower Boy or Igor are always like, I nearly always pick them out, and then I'm always like, I should listen to something else. Like, I should go through some of my other collection to put it on. So there's just something about the music that I don't know whether like Tyler would appreciate, that there's just some like, English white boy who's latched on to the music this much, but I don't want to say it speaks to me, because that sounds like odd, but like it just hits. It's just good vibes every single time. And I think that is a mixture, the artistry and the instrumentation and fun lyrics, fun personality. And I'm definitely kind of just gushing a little bit here about one of my favorite artists, but like,
no, I think it needs a gush.
Yeah, like even just before you came on, I was just having a little scroll of his Spotify, because I've listened to most of his stuff, and I was like, oh yeah, I'll just remind myself what Cash In, Cash Out, which is just a single that came out in 2022, which was a Pharrell Williams, 21 Savage, Tyler the Creator combo single, and it's kind of honestly, it's not the best song. Like, it's good, but it's a bit mid. But the music video is class. But then Tyler's verse hits, and he just hits different. Like, the other two almost sound like they're asleep at the wheel compared to Tyler the Creator's like input. Like, he just gives so much personality.
Yeah.
And like his vocals and his inflections and his little like the little noises he makes, like it just has so much more presence on a track than just some other artists who almost sound like they're not trying, or they're trying to sound just maintain this like air of coolness. Whereas because Tyler's always been a little bit of a weirdo, a little bit of like,
plays a bit of like a kind of cartoonish.
Plays a character,
like,
yeah.
One of those, not one of these neat, comfortable, like straight up simple American cartoons. Like one of these weird kind of like slightly grotesque cartoons.
One of those ones that you like. You turn the TV on at 2 a.m. and you're like, what the fuck is this? I should not be watching this.
That's the Tyler vibe. And actually, something else that might be useful to paint a bit of a picture around this album, and also that I'm quite interested just to find out from you, is you kind of hinted at an answer to this, I think, because you said the three albums you mentioned basically are Flower Boy, Ego, and Call Me If You Get Lost, which are his three most recent ones. And Flower Boy was obviously a bit, and I've not really listened to anything pre-Flower Boy. Flower Boy was a bit of like a transformation for him, though.
It was a turning point.
Are you as interested in his earlier stuff? Do you care for it at all? Like where are your feelings on that? And if like it might be worth just sort of describing that change for the audience, so to speak.
It's this really interesting one where I think Tyler's one of these people that I'm really glad had the time to kind of gestate, and like his earlier stuff was successful enough that he could get to a point where he was then able to produce better things. Because I don't know if it might be a little bit of a hot take with Tyler the Creator fans, but I think his first couple of projects aren't particularly good, and I think the one that preceded Flower Boy,
that Cherry Bomb
was bad. It was just not a good album. I think there's like one or two tracks on there that I don't mind. Like, I don't mind Death Camp. Like, I'd put it on a gym playlist or something. But overall, that whole album, it's definitely like a miss for me.
And is that him? Because I like I say, I really don't know much about his earlier stuff, other than he had a reputation for being like a bit of a shock merchant. He was banned from the UK for a while by Theresa May, I think.
Theresa May, yeah.
Because he would say all this shocking stuff. But I mean, that's taken from a long tradition of like, hardcore hip hop which plays with almost like horror tropes or like sort of shocking tropes.
I think the problem for me with Cherry Bomb is that it is exactly that. He's peddling this kind of shock merchant side, but it's just trying too hard, and it's very much forcing it. And I don't think it's like bad because it's like, I'd listen to a lot of that kind of music that is that kind of shock value side of things. I don't know if it's a particularly good example, but I've always enjoyed the work of Danny Brown, who really leans into that kind of weirdo, almost gross out narratives a lot of the time. But I think he provides it in a very kind of like tight little package, which is just like...
Yeah, I guess Danny Brown wouldn't necessarily say... I mean, not that I can think of, wouldn't necessarily say something grotesquely offensive. He would more just say outlandish, weird stuff and deliver it in an outlandish, weird way, but more in the way of like giving you the insight into the head of a crack addict than giving you the insight into the head of like a serial killer or something. Like it's...
I think the thing is though, even so, like, again, maybe not like the best example, but like obviously Eminem in his day provided a lot of those kind of like insight into the headspace of a crazy killer or someone who's kidnapped his girlfriend and put them in the trunk of the car or is going to murder their mum in the woods or whatever. But like the thing about Cherry Bomb is that it felt like, there's those like kind of kids at school who the way that they want to try and gain attention is by just being that kind of a bit edgy and a little bit like but there's no substance to it. It lacks, there's no like insight. They're just saying it for the shock value. And in a way that's what Cherry Bomb feels like, and Cherry Bomb feels a little bit lazy in that respect, and I feel like the production isn't quite there. It just doesn't lack the cohesive kind of spirit, and it feels like even like a dip down from his previous one, Wolf. I think Wolf has more interesting things going on for it, and even his like first album, Goblin, which is very much that kind of shock value kind of album. Like that's kind of how he made a name for himself initially. But I think Goblin does it in a more cohesive way than Cherry Bomb. So for me, Cherry Bomb was this like dip in Tyler's kind of career, but I am aware of the fact that I only came to Tyler's older work later. So I wasn't with Tyler from the beginning, because like when he was making that earlier stuff, that wasn't the kind of music I was listening to, and I was still quite new to kind of opening myself up to different genres and that. It's funny because I do like specifically remember a guy that we were friends with at school who he had a phase of being like a proper like skater bro kind of dude. Like he'd hang out at the the skate park in York and hang with that kind of crowd, which is quite funny because he's now not like that at all. He's a very like clean cut jawline, gym going dude. Living it up in pampered hotel rooms.
Skateboarders can have jawlines too, though.
But they have like a grizzled jawline with like slashes across it where they've like kissed the pavement. Whereas this guy's now living it up in like 4-star luxury hotels, posting Instagram stories to make his ex-girlfriend jealous. Anyway, not to go off that too much on that tangent, but like I remember he was really into Tyler in Tyler's earlier kind of stuff. And that's what I kind of always associated it with, that kind of like grungy alternative, trying a little bit too hard, kind of weirdo energy, not that intriguing. And then I don't know if it says something about like, I guess me like it must, I guess it does in a way, but it wasn't until like Flower Boy came along. Flower Boy was introduced to me by Tom, who we've had on the podcast before, and I think he'd started listening to it, like his sister had introduced him to it, and he was listening to a little bit of it. Probably the ones with Rex Orange County on, because it's that kind of like indie vibe that like sneaks in and it's on playlists. And this was at a time when I listened to primarily playlists. So for the longest time, a lot of Flower Boy was like piecemeal for me. Like it was like, oh, I know this song and this song and this song, and it turns out that they're all from Flower Boy. But they kind of like infiltrated their way into my like musical listening habits, and they ended up on these kind of playlists like the English Summer and like Vibing Out and like whatever else, like whatever vibe the song fit, they ended up on a playlist. And then it wasn't until Igor, which in my opinion is Tyler's magnum opus, really. I think Igor is Tyler's best album. Because I'd kind of grown this affinity gradually for all these individual Tyler Creator songs on Flower Boy, and kind of pieced together that it was all this one album, and I just really enjoyed it and I was really vibing with it. When we eventually got the announcement that Igor was coming out, I was like a Tyler the Creator fan at that point, which meant that when Igor came out, that was the first time I like anticipated an album release. Sure. And when it came out, it was in third year, and I specifically remember like it came out at like, I don't know, maybe like 8 o'clock UK time, and I literally sat in my third year uni room with all the lights off, headphones on, and just like as soon as it released, listened to it from start to finish all the way through, and then again, and tried to like soak it in. Especially because when it released, I think Tyler released a statement like, please listen to this in order as a flow. And I was like, I will respect that request because I trust in you. But that was kind of, funnily enough, that was kind of my introduction to listening to albums as an experience. So my first real album experience was thanks to Tyler the Creator. And that's what has since got me into listening to albums more than say playlists, because I'm there like I'm gonna listen to what the artist has kind of put together, at least when it's a good album. Is that there's a lot of thought that's gone into it. And I would have picked Igor, but I just feel like I had more kind of nostalgia for / more interesting things to say. And I think because Flower Boy is a little bit more of a, I think it's a fantastic album. Like for me, it's definitely like, you know, an 8 or a 9 out of 10. I enjoy it thoroughly, but because it's still this kind of proto years Tyler in a sense that it's coming right after that, what I consider a dip in quality, and it's kind of him working on his image and his music and his taste and working on himself as an artist and deciding where he wants to go. And it's kind of that coming back up out of that dip, and then it's almost setting the stage for Igor. So I kind of see Flower Boy as this kind of reimagining of himself, this renaissance almost. Flower Boy is like the renaissance. Igor is the magnum opus, and then Call Me If You Get Lost feels like the victory lap, where he's like celebrating this like completely transformative sound, where he comes out from being the edgy, try-hard goblin weirdo, which I think clearly does still like have a deep influence in his work, but like he's then kind of progressed it and evolved it into something that he can truly feel proud of. And I think is genuinely like a unique set of sounds. I think when you hear a Tyler beat or you hear Tyler on a track, it's like it's tangibly recognizable.
Igor in particular, I know we haven't picked that, and we always fall into this trap of when we've picked an album with an artist that one of us or both of us really like, we end up talking about all the other albums. But Igor is just such a distinct sound, isn't it?
Oh god, yeah.
You're so right about that sort of the cohesiveness of it as an album as well. Like what a first album to have, or not first album, but you know what I mean, what a first kind of album that you associate with that album listening experience.
Yeah.
And that for me as well actually was the one that I really got into, because I'd listened to Flower Boy a bit before, but I'd never really got into Flower Boy that much. And it was interesting for me re-listening for this and sort of hearing far more than I'd ever appreciated those Igor sounds. Like
you can definitely hear the building blocks for Igor, can't you?
100%, yeah.
Like I think in particular Garden Shed feels like a prototype Igor track. I think almost.
It's interesting because I wonder if in part it's like we've talked a bit about like how album covers influence the way that you hear a sounds, but Igor always sounded like a really purple album to me, and Flower Boy always sounded like a really orange album. And somehow I think that was a genuine block to be matching the two. Like, whereas now, like, yeah, just listening back on it, yeah, I think you're completely right. I can't really remember specific songs, but I mean, for the benefit again of the audience, whoever they are, if they haven't listened to it, I guess what we're talking about here is that this is a like straight up hip hop and like hardcore hip hop artist who's transitioning into playing with melodies and sort of I don't even know how you describe it. It is like this weird hodgepodge that you end up with by the time you get to Igor. That is quite hard to characterize.
I don't know how to characterize it other than saying it's Tyler's sound. It's definitely like hip hop with pop infusions, but like Igor is indisputably a pop album, but it doesn't sound like any other pop music.
It's like weirdo pop.
It's weirdo pop, but it's not like anyone's weirdo pop. And I know what you mean in terms of like I can't necessarily. For me, I think Garden Shed has the most examples, but like I think scattered throughout the entirety of Flower Boy, there is these kind of either instruments used or melodies played with or just ideas kind of implemented that all it's funny like when you listen back it's like that they echo Igor, but obviously they're this experimental precursor, and you can definitely see where he took these sounds and was like, you know what, I want to take this further and play with this more, even to the extent of like integrating other artists and stuff like that. Because I think when Tyler transitioned from Cherry Bomb to Flower Boy, he changed his approach in the sense that so like everything on Flower Boy is produced by Tyler, which I think he'd produced most of his previous songs, but there were a few others that he just kind of like rapped over. But Flower Boy was his first project where he like produced 100% of it, which meant he was in control from like start to finish. And he made the active decision to reduce the amount of lines he had in every song and focus more on both the melodies of the featured artists, but also like the melodies and the rhythms of the instrumentals. So and then I think that works really, really well because the limited use of his vocals means that it feels like he's saying a lot more. There's more going on behind his words when there's fewer.
Yeah,
it's smartly written.
Pushed himself to think about them a bit more. He's less throwing things out there to grab your attention and more having to sort of use the time that he's given himself with care and precision, I guess, which links in with that broader sort of impression we're talking about of a kind of maturity, I suppose. There's something kind of charming about a youthful throwing everything at the page, but I think we tend to associate maturity with that being able to pick and filter out a bit more and know when to be silent, I suppose.
Yeah, a more patient, measured response.
That's a really good way of putting it.
I think as well it allows room for the audience / like the listener to interpret emotion and meaning and the message of the songs from the few lines that Tyler includes. Tyler's lines are more poetic. They're less like just. It's not obviously just stating, like you say, he's not having to fill a word count, so he's not just like filling it with obvious statements like a lot of the time. It's more left up to being a little bit more vague, which left people to like speculate on various lyrics and that kind of thing. But also like you read more into the instrumentals, you feel more about like how is this music making me feel? Whereas a lot of Tyler's older stuff is more, there's a beat in the background and there's rapping on top of it. Not all of his older stuff, like there's always been elements of this. You can definitely see his progression, but I think a lot of the stuff on Cherry Bomb feels like there's music in the background and he's rapping on top of it, and it's a very aggressive, shock value stuff. Whereas this is like, there's more breathing room in the tracks in the sense that you are left with the swells of the music to kind of feel your own emotions and apply your own, like pick up on the vibe that Tyler's putting down and put your own vibe down on top of it as well. Which is why I think it feels like quite a summery springtime album, because there's a lot of very kind of mellow, chill, like out in the sun with your friends kind of energy.
Yeah, the instrumental element, this is where I wish I had the full musical knowledge to kind of be able to describe it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you're right that like just describing it as Tyler is probably the best way, but it's got those kind of, it makes use of those vaguely sort of jazzy chords that you get in certain forms of soul and R&B, I guess.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't know whether that's necessarily specifically Spring-like, but it's got this kind of light, serene, beautiful kind of aesthetic. But then coupled with that sort of like, he's got very like openly imperfect singing, I guess.
Yes. Yeah.
Which gives it a sort of punky spirit whilst being the sweetest melodies. Which is one of the things that really attracted me about Igor, is that there is something so captivating in having something that, you know, if you put a really proficient singer over the top, could just be straight up a pop song. Not always, because there are often like really quite, you know, there is something, you know, off kilter about the instrumentals as well, but they could do. Whereas like the singing alone, it's him singing with heart and sort of passion, but also sort of like weakly, and as if he's about to, you know, especially on Igor more so, like as if he's about to get crowded out by the instrumental.
Yeah.
You know, so sort of almost like
you run the risk if you put
well.
a more classical singer in there of it becoming a little bit too sugary and sweet and mundane.
Yeah.
Whereas Tyler definitely brings this kind of rawness and roughness to all of his delivered lyrics, whether he's like rapping or singing. He has a very distinct voice, and like you say, it's not the most like classically trained, gorgeous singing voice in the world, but it's pleasant to listen to, at least in my point of view, but not pleasant in the sense of it being like melodic. He doesn't have a melodial voice. He just has a very spirited, I guess, spirited delivery.
Yeah, and but without like, I do think the way that we're describing it is probably just hard to really get it across like without listening. But I think the assumption to most people when you describe something like that would be, for example, like some of Slow Tie's new stuff, or when you get sort of punk singers sometimes, and there's a sort of like letting out all your emotions, and it, you know, the line between singing and shouting also gets blurred.
Yeah,
but it's not that either. It's really not that, and I guess that's kind of like one of the things that I sort of want to emphasize, and that I think makes it so intriguing, because I don't think it is that often that you get somebody that's kind of singing quite quietly and singing, you know, quite melodically, but just slightly off tune.
But it's still sounding good. Like it's off, but it works. I think it's quite. I don't know if you know this about this album, because like you touched on you know, if you just threw in a pop singer on some of these like songs, then you would probably just end up with kind of a very poppy track. A lot of this album, like a good couple of songs, are rejects. It is an album of rejects in a way. So Ain't Got Time, which is one of the more aggressive beats on the track, was initially produced by Tyler for the Life of Pablo album, but didn't make the cut. Since he didn't make the cut for that, he offered it up to Nicki Minaj, and she also said no, so he kept it for himself. Glitter was initially produced and written for Justin Bieber, but Justin Bieber didn't pick up the phone, so Tyler kept that one. And See You Again, which is a beautiful tune, is actually the most listened to song on the album according to Spotify's numbers, was rejected by Zayn Malik of all people.
Oh wow.
And Who Dat Boy was rejected by Schoolboy Q. So quite a lot of these songs were like offered up. Was Tyler working as a producer and as a songwriter with other artists in mind? Like he kind of wrote the melodies and the lyrics with this kind of intention that somebody else would be singing them. I'm not sure if it was the exact versions that we got. I'm not sure if he'd like changed them a little bit afterwards, but in a way I'm very glad that these songs all ended up as rejections, because I think we ended up with a bunch of like incredible songs in Tyler's voice and expressed in his kind of specific way, like you were saying, his kind of timid singing and like wonderful lush production. And I think they really like help build into his like artistry and were fundamental building blocks in leading to something like Igor like further down the road. And they're just like really they're all fantastic parts of the album, and they just fit so perfectly that trying to imagine any of these other artists doing it feels just so wrong. But some poor sods in some parallel universe got the Zayn Malik version of "See You Again" and not Tyler's version, and man, they have it rough.
if all of those people had have taken those, we might never have got this Tyler, presumably, because he might have gone on thinking, this is the stuff that I make for other people that you know, and I can change up my sound for those people, but I make this stuff, you know, this aggressive stuff. This is the stuff I do.
Yeah, he could have easily just continued down that road, or just dropped off as a you know, like a front artist and just become one of those writers producers behind the scenes kind of people.
Yeah, it takes a confidence to stick your neck out with something like this. I think I actually don't like. Have you seen interviews where he talks about that decision? I seem to remember stuff around when Igor came out, because I guess that was still like a bit of a progression of the sound.
Yeah,
him talking about, you know, plucking up the courage to do all of that. But I can't really remember any details. But it is like, you know, it is a big kind of thing, and it's not like he was, you know, like it feels different to say Arctic Monkeys when they released, what was the name of their one set on them, in Tranquility Base and Casino,
Hotel Casino, Casino,
that one. Feels like somebody that's, you know, long since established themselves, long since made all the money they ever need to make, and are just like, fuck it, I feel like doing a crooner album. I'm gonna do that. You know, like this feels more like somebody who's on an upward trajectory, I think, at the time, and makes quite a bold decision whilst on that to take a risk, you know, and to do so in a way that's suddenly making yourself quite vulnerable, having been able to hide at a distance behind ironic lyricism this whole time.
Absolutely, he definitely like carved out his niche. He definitely carved out this like fan base of people who really enjoyed the kind of edgier sounds that he made. And he made an active decision, and I don't think Flower Boy turned all of them away. I think most people were like happy to ride with Flower Boy, and then I think it was Igor that was the one that upset those kind of old school fans the most. And then I think it's only now with like the kind of perspective and the hindsight that you can see Flower Boy as this progenitor to Igor. But I think at the time, Flower Boy just felt like for most people, it felt like a better album. I think I imagine if there's any people who are like massive fans of Cherry Bomb, they probably have the opposite opinion to me. They probably think that Flower Boy was the beginning of the end, but they're wrong. So
it's good to know we're open to multiple perspectives on this podcast.
I'm open to all of the perspectives except for Cherry Bomb is good. That's where I draw the line.
I can happily absolve myself of responsibility in this debate because I've not listened to it. So who knows?
I mean, there was a period where it's like, so again, my bias is that I came into Tyler the Creator's work at Flower Boy, so it always has this kind of special place in my heart. I probably enjoy it more than it deserves, but also kind of hold it on a pedestal above the earlier work more than maybe is fair or maybe older fans would like. But I did, I nearly said as my due diligence, but I didn't fucking do it when we were doing the podcast or anything. I just did it. You know, when you get into an artist and you're like, I want to hear everything they've done. I want to like dive into their stuff. And you've heard that their older stuff is different or whatever, but you know, like, I'll cut through. And I got on, like, tried to listen to some of the older stuff, even just did like This Is Tyler the Creator, like the playlist that like covers all of his like greatest hits and stuff. And I just find the older stuff harder to listen to because it's, you know, just say what it is the older stuff. It is the stuff that's early on in his career. He's not found the flow, there's his voice, like the production, like it just isn't. It's not as tight. It's not as well made. And I don't hold that against Tyler because that was his. You know, he was just a kid messing around, playing, like making music with his mates. Part of is it Odd Future? Was their rap collective?
Yeah, I was going to ask whether you'd listen to any of them.
I think
sort of like our generation's Wu-Tang is like
in a way, but less talented than Wu-Tang for sure.
I mean, they produced a lot of like era-defining artists. So I don't know how. I mean, I can't comment. I only know the one tune by Odd Future, but it's a banging one.
I think Odd Future had this. To be fair, I don't know enough about Wu-Tang. I think is my issue to make the comparison. But from my understanding, Wu-Tang produced this might be completely wrong, but did Wu-Tang have most of the artists in Wu-Tang were good? Whereas
I think that was kind of one of the things that was crazy.
The minority were good. The majority were mid/bad. But the good ones, so like Tyler, Earl Sweatshirt,
Frank Ocean,
they are era-defining musicians. They are incredible. They are all incredible in their own respects. But Odd Future was a lot bigger than just those 5 or 6 genuinely talented individuals.
Yeah.
And I think there are a lot of people involved in Odd Future who, just, I don't want to shit on them. They just weren't as talented, but they were friends. It was a friendship group almost. If our group of mates at uni all decided to be a musical collective, we're not all gonna shine. Yeah, but but not really, yeah. But say if you got a group of 20 of your mates together,
yeah,
you're all gonna really enjoy hanging out on a Sunday, just chilling and making music, but you're not all gonna be naturally gifted at music making necessarily. Your talents might lie elsewhere. And I think that was kind of the case for Odd Future.
I guess, yeah, all comparisons to Wu-Tang,
it's a bit unfair, really.
Yeah, whenever you compare to classics, and the reason they get the comparison, I think, is partly just the structure, that notion of you get a collective together,
you
release an album that then is a launching pad for multiple careers.
It really wouldn't surprise me if Odd Future invited that comparison as well. If they were the ones who were the modern Wu-Tang Clan or something.
But also in terms of the fact that it was almost a little cultural scene at the same time, the playing with controversial lyricism and all that kind of stuff. I think all of that goes in common with Wu-Tang. Have you listened to 36th Chambers, actually, just as a side recommendation? Their classic album, Wu-Tang. Because I've
never listened to it all the way through, but I've listened to quite a few of the songs on it. It's one of those ones that's I'm I need to get around to that. I need to get around to that. And I've just never. It's one of those ones that I'm I want to give it the same reverence I gave to Igor, where I just sit down and listen to it. And I've never I've not yet found the right time to go. It is now 36 Chambers time, but it's annoying because I have a bit of a fancy headphone setup, but it's currently broken. So I'm waiting to get that repaired, which is the whole thing, because I can't be bothered to ship it over to the US to get it fixed. So I'm trying to find a local repair person. But that's an uninteresting story that basically boils down to I have become a snob when listening to albums. If I know it's going to be a good album, if I'm if it's one of those all-time classics and greats, I'm there well, I want to listen to it on the good headphone.
That's reasonable to be fair. Yeah, it's. I mean, it does make a difference. I guess it's diminishing once you get to the to a certain level.
Oh, it absolutely is. And it's one of those things where it's with vinyl, where people are oh, can you hear the difference? And it's you can, but I don't think it's worth the investment unless you're into it for all the other reasons. And also, you can hear the difference, but only when you go back. You listen to the stuff on vinyl and the stuff on fancy gear or whatever, and you're oh yeah, that sounds really good, but you don't really appreciate how good it sounds until you go back to listening to it on your old headphones or your in-ear headphones or in the car, and then you're oh my god, it's so much worse now. So if anything, it just ruins it for yourself. So really, stick with what you've got and just enjoy. Don't pursue, because otherwise you end up like those crazy people who have massive vinyl setups and they siphon off electricity from the grid on a separate illegal thing to make sure that their power outlet is the AC/DC is synchronized properly.
Is this a thing? Is it?
Yeah. There's. I don't know how a fair representation I'm giving, but I remember watching a YouTube video where these proper I think it was a Japanese guy, and he was a mega audiophile, and he just had the most expensive setup probably possible, really so fine tuned, everything just perfectly done, and he had these crisp, like original pressing records of like, you know, beautiful like orchestral music and all this kind of stuff. And he was so dedicated to the ultimate perfect sound. He'd like jerry-rigged some kind of system to take electricity off the grid in a way that was more like, I don't know. I don't even know what it would really achieve. I guess it wasn't going through some kind of transformer or generator so that it was like a more clear signal or whatever, like, or like that, this kind of like sound, like analog technology is basically voodoo magic, because sometimes it just like does something strange. And unlike, I feel like with digital stuff, this is a whole like separate rant, but digital stuff is like, you can usually figure it out, and if in doubt, turn it on and off again, like off and on again, and it will work. Like,
Does tend to work, yeah.
It's annoying with your like Apple headphones, but eventually they connect, and sometimes it's easy to figure out, oh, it's the drivers, or you just know, oh, my headphones aren't compatible with this computer, and I know that's why. With analog stuff, you can never figure out why it's not working, or why it suddenly has a buzzy, crackly noise in it. Like, you can theorize, and then you just wiggle a wire, and it fixes, and you're like, I don't know what that changed, but voodoo magic. So it's basically, it's a slippery slope. Don't get into it.
Honestly, it is making me realize like there is something to be said in general for like, just like, if you don't want too much, like as in want in the abstract sense, if you just do away with wanting, you know, wanting more. I guess this is the Buddhist thing, isn't it, a lot of the time? And just asceticism in general, like you can sort of like just enjoy what you have a lot of the time, and you save yourself a lot of suffering as soon as you like. I always, sorry, we're on a real tangent now, but you can always edit around this. But
I know how I can link it back, so keep going.
Oh, perfect. Well, I was just describing this psychology to Hannah when like I had a series of things, like including like my climbing shoes, when I wore through my dad's old shoes and had to get new ones of them, and I was just like, I was finding it really stressful, and I was trying to get across this notion of like, I think at some point I've developed this notion of my life as just steadily floating along, purely happy, you know, got what I need, everything's good, and then some kind of external shock comes in, either like something breaks and I have to get a new one, or like something really gets in my head that I want something.
Yeah.
And then it's just suffering until I get it. But like, not to make this too like moralistic about capitalism, but like, I feel like it's possible to live your entire life in that state of being constantly. Like, as soon as you've got the one thing, you're like,
you need
I really else. Oh, you know, I know exactly what I need next, you know, like, and not just capitalism actually, like clearly it's just like this very human kind of thing, like the audiophile phenomenon. But yeah, basically it's not a particularly original thought. I think it is literally, you know, thousands of years of Buddhism, but just don't want anything. Don't want.
To quote the iconic philosophical movie Over the Hedge, enough is never enough.
It's beautiful.
But to link it back to Tyler, is that I think a lot of the time in Flower Boy and in Call Me If You Get Lost, he does talk about filling the void with stuff, buying cars, buying clothes, buying like yachts, mansions, whatever. And he does touch upon how simultaneously he clearly loves this kind of lavish lifestyle that he leads. Like a lot of the brand deals and little like video snippets he does is like showing off he's massively into cars, he's massively into bikes, he's massively into clothes, and he loves like being able to purchase it all and have it. And like, I think he does gain joy from his possessions, but also a lot of the time in his songs he does talk about how like he's purchasing things till he's annoyed, like just items to fill up the void. I think I've just accidentally quoted lyrics word for word there.
I mean that was like a pure rhyme, so if that wasn't quoting, then that was like you just spitting bars there.
Spitting hot fire. But I think he very much struggles with this as well, and I think you're right, Ronan. I think generally speaking, if you just you can have things. You know, I'm not saying be a complete minimalist, but take joy in what you have, and don't pursue more. Always.
I've just got to say, just in the interests of BBC like balance. My criticism of this is that it leads to exactly the phenomenon I was just describing, where like inevitably there are external shocks. There are situations where suddenly you have to,
would you say,
accommodate
worse
change.
by
And if you've built your happiness around stasis, around
stasis.
enjoying what you have, suddenly when you don't have it, or when you realize you need to make a progression to the next step, or whatever it is, you've created a lot of unnecessary burden for yourself.
I think as well, the thing that I've thought about a lot is how there's definitely for a long time there's been this kind of idea of like declutter your life. You don't need things, or the things that you have are enough. And I'd say in terms of like, if you are, I think, depending on your budget, like if you're there wanting to have a go at making some music and you have an instrument, give it a go on the instrument. I'm not saying go out of your way to spend a load of money on all the gear when you've got no idea. But I think as well there is, if you can treat yourself to something that you will get joy out of, whether it's, I think like it kind of, for me, it's like a piece of kit. If you have a nice piece of kit, you enjoy using it, which means you're more likely to use it. And you, like my example, it's like a daft little thing, but I got a fountain pen that I really like, and by having this fountain pen, it's like a pleasure to write with, which means I like using it, which means I now enjoy writing people postcards or birthday cards or whatever, which means I'm more inclined to do it, which in itself is like a nice thing because people like receiving cards and stuff. So it's like this kind of like feedback loop of, because I have this nice thing to use. So in a sense, why I do buy into like, don't go chasing the latest expensive camera, the latest expensive keyboard, the latest expensive whatever. I think occasionally if you decide on something, I mean, this is part where the stress comes in, is deciding what the perfect thing for you is. But if you decide like, I really enjoy producing music, I'm going to treat myself to a MIDI keyboard, or to a if you buy yourself Fruity Loops or whatever, expensive purchases, but like if it's gonna make it a joy to do the thing you love anyway, potentially a worthwhile purchase, especially because you probably get more use, more worth out of it.
Yeah, don't be a cheapskate. Don't go spending all your money. There we go.
Yeah, find a balance.
Life lessons with Ronan and Louis, our spin-off podcast. It's been a while since we had one of them.
Yeah, I mean, Tyler, he just gets you thinking all philosophical, like, love, loss, cards, stuff. Yeah. I have 2 more points, actually, that I wrote down about this album, on Tyler in general, really. Just to kind of close it out, and then we can do favourite songs, and then we can do the quiz. Is one of my thoughts was, one of my very favourite things that I've ever seen, I think it was a tweet, which was tweeted shortly after the release of Igor, describing Tyler's musical journey, was Tyler's music has gone from homophobic to homosexual. And I think that really, really encompasses the journey. I don't know how, if you're listening to this and you're new to his stuff, you might not know. His earlier stuff does drop quite a lot of homophobic slurs. And Igor is basically an album, a heartbreak album about a relationship with a guy. So we've had the full spectrum with Tyler, He
also, interestingly, basically comes out on Flower Boy, but as far as I'm aware, no, like I'm assuming it raised eyebrows at the time, but I don't think it was fully picked up on, was it? Like, or I don't think it was fully like.
He'd kind of hinted at his sexuality before, but like in a way where everyone was like, I can't tell if he's serious, if he's just being a little goopy goblin and like messing with people. And then Flower Boy, when he released singles from it, there was very much this kind of like focus on the lyrics, and like, so like Garden Shed was very much spotted as being this kind of being in the closet like imagery. Okay. And then quite a few of his other, like there's one point where he mentioned like fancying a guy called Clancy. There's lyrics about him driving around in a convertible with a guy who looks like River Phoenix in his passenger seat, stuff like that. So I think this very much was his kind of, I am actually like.
I mean, the big one I was thinking of was this next line gonna have him like, whoa, kissing white boys
Since 2004, yeah. So that's I haven't even forgot about that one, but that is a that's a big one.
I mean, it's pretty explicit, and it's also just fantastic because he rhymes "whoa" with 2004.
Yeah, and it works because of his inflection. Like it works so well.
Brilliant. Yeah,
but I think that was a prime one where I think that line was in one. Like that line is in one of the songs that drops as a single. And I think when that dropped as a single, there were like eyebrows raised, but there were eyebrows raised in like a, is he playing a game here? Like what's the crack? And I think he was simultaneously applauded by some publications as like, oh nice, we've got like an openly gay rapper in the mainstream. But I think Tyler was part of that kind of wave of more kind of like openly gay rappers coming out and being like, oh yeah, actually like there's quite a lot of us, and rap and hip hop can be quite a homophobic culture, and we're gonna see if we can change that a little bit, despite the fact that Tyler was definitely part of that kind of toxicity back in the day. But I think there were also a lot of publications where they're like, nah, he's playing with us, you know, or like, oh, he's just having his own, or even like he's been insulting, like he's just pretending or something like that. So
being a bit mocking.
I think again, in hindsight, we can be like, yeah, this is definitely kind of like the coming out album in a way.
I've got to quickly, I want to use this opportunity to just throw out my other favorite coming out line. Also from another Odd Future member, from Frank Ocean on their Odd Future track Oldie, which is just like a brilliant, very laid back kind of posse cut. But he just has a line in there where he goes, I'm high and I'm bi. Wait, I mean I'm straight.
yeah.
Which is just brilliantly like flippant and kind of like, carefree, really.
That's class.
And has a similar vibe of you just can't tell like whether it's a piss take but obviously like, you know, Frank Ocean has then kind of been a bit of a sort of leader in that as well.
I think it's a lot of the Odd Future members actually.
Yeah, well, for a bunch of people who were you know, sort of provocateurs, they have sort of, I think, carved out a bit of a space where, I mean, like you know, people like Lil Nas X, you could sort of track as a lineage back to sort of them, where they've sort of got like a provocative tongue-in-cheek streak, but also are kind of making waves in terms of, you know, what identities are acceptable within kind of mainstream like hip-hop and all that kind of stuff.
It is really cool to see. My like last point, I guess, summarizing up, is I think when I was talking earlier about like my two artists who are definitely in my top three, Tyler and Gorillaz, in part it's because of, you know, the music that they make and like the fact that I can always enjoy songs from them. But I think a key feature of both of them, and a feature that I've kind of realized that I'm definitely like a bit of a fiend for when it comes to artistry, is these kind of multifaceted artists. So I think, and Tyler kind of encompasses that because he writes, he produces, he raps, he directs, like he's all this other stuff going on as well that's not music related, you know, like all these clothing lines and all that kind of stuff. Like he's a really creative kind of person. But just like even like narrowing down on the music side of things, I just really enjoy an artist who delivers a vision from start to finish that is just exactly what they wanted to make. And I think that artists like Tyler, and I just throw in JPEG Mafia as an example as well, because I think he's like this. I think these multifaceted artists almost intimidate other people in the hip hop scene or in the music scene generally, because it is just this sheer force of talent.
It's like auteur musicians, if that's a thing.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like how you get auteur directors. I don't know whether it's like either whether that word is used as well for musicians or if there's another separate word, but you know, there's probably an obvious one that I'm not thinking of. But yeah, that's kind of like what you're describing there, and it's sort of, actually just on that as well. I was actually thinking, listening to this again, I could hear some of the Gorillaz connection also just in the sense of that genre bendiness. I think you have quite a love for that.
I think that love comes from Gorillaz because they were one of my first bands, and then I think obviously ever since Demon Days, essentially all their stuff from there, all of their influences then influenced me, and Gorillaz were influenced by hip hop and by underground hip hop and by weirdo hip hop, and funnily enough, Tyler kind of plays on a lot of those sounds. So I think it is kind of a natural progression. I imagine there are a lot of people who have Gorillaz Tyler the Creator crossover, like me, to be honest.
I'll also, I've already recommended it, but I'll throw in Balloon Mind State by De La Soul as well, because I've still been rinsing it, and just talking of like that weirdo hip hop vibe, like
ever since you brought up that they're on Spotify now, I've been so happy. I've been rinsing them as well. It's just absolute
yes,
tune.
Love to hear it.
Like we might have to talk about one of theirs in the future.
I could ramble.
Do you want to pick out any favorite tracks from Flower Boy? I feel like we've not necessarily touched loads on like what your kind of thoughts overall. I don't know if you want to just quickly be like, coming back to it, or like, was this your first time listening to it all in one go, or have you listened to it before but it's not kind of sporadic?
No, I think I'd listened to it all in one go before, but like I say, I'd never really got into it, and I still think that like I prefer Igor, and I can't quite explain why that is. Like I remember saying to you way back at uni, probably, like, oh yeah, Flower Boy's are right, but there's only really a few tracks like I Ain't Got Time that I could get into, and I remember you saying something along the lines of like, oh yes, you'd be more of like an older kind of Tyler kind of person, like his older stuff, and I just remember like thinking, oh yeah, well I guess that is like the sort of more aggressive stuff from it, but then Igor
is not that
isn't that aggressive a lot, but yeah, so I can't quite,
but like I can see the logic, but I also fully understand why. And like, honest, Igor is the better album. Like Igor is Tyler's best album.
Yeah, I guess it just for whatever reason, like Igor still probably does it for me like more. But yeah, I really enjoyed listening back to it, having had a sort of long gap and sort of having only really listened to Igor in the last few years, and sort of coming back to this, I really enjoyed it. I had one like tiny interesting thought. Just as a quick aside, we're getting late in the podcast for tangents, but I'll rattle through this one. I thought it was really interesting when Pothole came on. I was really enjoying Pothole, and then I saw that it was featuring Jaden Smith. And it got me thinking about the extent to which, no matter how much I try to avoid it, I'm influenced by like whether I should like something, and something about like knowing Jaden Smith was on it made me not want to like it, and it almost stopped me from like putting it on a playlist. It was like that bad. And then I suddenly like reflected upon that and thought how ridiculous that was, and made a mental note to chat about it, and then added it to my playlist to try and overcome that. But I just thought it's so funny the way that can actively shape your experience of music. Literally just something as simple as like a name attached to it, or something like that.
It's like if you see something featuring Justin Bieber, you're just like, no, mind that.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't be seen listening to that.
It's silly, and I do try to avoid it, but there we go. I caught myself out on that one. But yeah, I think that's about everything. I'm sure pretty much everything else has been covered in the kind of meandering conversation we've had.
Oh yeah. Any favorite tracks then?
Yeah, I can name the ones that I've like. So I added 3 conveniently to a playlist, having listened through it. I added Pothole, overcoming that stigma, Garden Sheds, and 911. Because also, have you listened to Red Stripe Rhapsody? Like that, because I will send you the tune or not, because you will love it. But it's like Hannah's sister showed it to us, I think, originally, and it's by a Leeds artist and all about just being a student in Leeds. Just a generally incredible song that uses the 911 hook at the end. It just, what's the term, like interpolates it, so it's not sampled, but it just recreates it and then shifts slightly. But it's a beautiful melody that I enjoyed listening to it, having been so familiar with the Red Stripe Rhapsody kind of use of it.
I think I'm going to go with, I really like, well, it's always tough when it's your own album that you've brought, because you like all of them most of the time. And with me, I really enjoy basically every single song on this album. I feel like the weakest song is the closer, which I can take or leave, but sometimes it just hits nicely on like a sunny drive or whatever. But I think my top 3 picks, if I was forced to pick 3 to save, would be See You Again and Glitter, which are 2 of the more kind of romantic songs. But there's just something about them. There's something about that off-kilter, like you say, that kind of interesting way that Tyler both sings and raps I don't know, they just really capture me, and I also feel like I can sing along to most of the lyrics on most of these songs, but definitely those two. And then I'm gonna pick one just to spite the Needle Drop, who obviously doesn't listen or know that we exist. But this is one of the albums that's like I already knew that I loved this album from start to finish before I stumbled across his YouTube channel. And then so it's like this kind of one where I'm like, I'm gonna watch his review to see what he thinks. And he really enjoys it as well. But for him, one of the weaker tracks was Where This Flower Blooms. And I just disagree with that. I think Where This Flower Blooms rocks because that fucking heavy bass line, it just, if you get that cranked in the car or in the gym or just vibing in the park, it slaps, and it's just such a sick way to start the album essentially, because it's the second track after Forward, and Forward is like this really lovely intro, and then it just drops into Where This Flower Blooms and booms Where This Flower Blooms, which has that kind of booming drum line bass line throughout the track, and I just fuck you, Anthony. I really like that song. They're my top three. It's how we're gonna gain momentum, Ronan. We're gonna continue our theme of starting beef.
The controversy.
Get some controversy. It's a shame we're not on Twitter because we could start some Twitter fights, but I don't want to get Twitter because it's a dumpster fire. But probably a good way to start some beef. But yeah, that's my picks. That's my album. Thank you for letting me ramble on about it.
Oh, thank you for picking it. And have we got a quiz?
I do have a quiz. It's time for the quiz. Do 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 do.
Bing. I decided to do a really powerful bing that time because it was
to make up for last time.
Last time, yeah.
So in our quiz, I've tried to lean into our very kind of classic quiz formula, where I take the name of the album and choose, the questions affiliated with the words involved. However, Flower Boy is only a 2-word album title, so it was a bit of a stretch. But thankfully, this album actually did have this isn't one of the questions, don't worry. I'm just letting you know that this album had a original title of Scumfuck Flower Boy, which I think was more of this kind of playing with the idea that it was this merger between the old Tyler and what would be the new Tyler. You've got your Scumfuck Goblin era Tyler, Flower Boy Igor era Tyler is a way of looking at it through rose-tinted glasses. However, on release, it was just Flower Boy. But the questions will be around Scumfuck and Flower Boy. So, question 1. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
The video game Scum was released into early access in 2018. Steam user Madeo reviewed it positively by saying, "Friend pooped in front of me, so I peed on his head. 10 out of 10. What genre of game is Scum?"
Is shock a genre? I'm gonna say it is like Sims-esque, whatever genre that would be.
I think Sims-esque is probably a genre, considering there's only really one game that's Sims-esque. Well, 4, sure. And they are The Sims.
That wasn't necessarily the best bet
then. Scum is of course it is, there's a billion of them. It's a multiplayer open-world survival game.
Sure,
so
okay. That would have been a safer bet,
Run around, and it would have been a safer bet, but I'd have also been surprised if you'd have got that one. I didn't expect you to. But you might get this one.
Ooh.
Fuck is thought to derive from the German word fricken. Excuse my German accent there. I don't have one. What does fricken translate to?
I have no idea.
If you think that it eventually evolved into fuck.
Yeah, to fuck then. Sex.
It's a little bit more Germanic in the sense that it's quite
to have relations.
You've gone more French there, I'd argue. You've gone more romantic.
Okay, to copulate in order to reproduce for the next generation. such that
I think-
we may continue the race. Actually, no, that got a bit too Nazi-like at the end there. It wasn't meant to be. It wasn't meant to be a Nazi joke.
I was thinking more dramatic in the sense that it's quite industrial. It means to strike or to hit.
Oh
Which,
God, that's quite aggressive.
It is, isn't it? The sunflower is the national flower of which country? We mentioned them earlier in the podcast.
Did we? Oh, well, that's really testing my attention skills. I don't like that. You see, I was going to say Holland, but I don't think we mentioned Holland.
Nope.
What countries have we mentioned? I don't remember mentioning any countries.
I don't know how much of a clue to give you, considering that this is somewhat competitive and our points are calculated.
The UK.
It's close. If you just added a few more letters onto the end, it's Ukraine.
Wales. Oh, Ukraine.
A few more. Wales.
I thought you were going to say a few more miles, or like I don't. But then also that. Oh, that's revealing my bias. Clearly, I was thinking England when I said UK. That's not great.
And England would have worked because earlier in the podcast we talked about how I went to see England play Ukraine. In football. So, okay, last question. You might get this one. Who directed the 2010 movie Boy?
Oh, I do know this one. Taika Waititi.
That is correct, sir. Congratulations.
It's a cracking film as well, actually. Like, really, have you seen it? It's quite...
I've not. I didn't even know it existed until I Googled Boy to see what would come up that I could ask questions about. And that movie came along. So
well worth a watch.
I'm going to have to go seek that out, yeah.
I actually think it's like one of my... It could be my favourite of his, in a way, actually.
Really?
Like, it captures all of these themes that like he especially returns to in Jojo Rabbit, but also to an extent like Hunt for the Wilder People and all that kind of stuff. Like all this coming of age. Like, actually, I'm lying. What We Do in the Shadows is probably just the funniest.
What We Do in the Shadows is my favorite.
Yeah. That would probably have to be it. But in terms of like that Taika Waititi heart that he's quite good at doing, it's just about a boy and his father, and like losing that idolizing of, you know, a father. And I don't know. It's really worth watch, and it's just so Kiwi as well. It's great.
Oh, that's a nice little extra recommendation to end on. So go away, listen to Flower Boy, and then watch Boy. Thank you all very much for listening. If you are out there listening, let us know. Email us or message us on Instagram, or just...
Where can they do that, Louis?
Yeah,
I'm
they
just
can
trying to mix it up a bit there. That's
nice. Oh, nice, fresh. I like it. It's call to action. They can find us at More of Something Else Entirely on Instagram, or you can email us at moreofsomethingelseentirely@gmail.com. Or I've discovered this cool little feature. Sadly, guys, if you listen on other platforms, it might not be available. But on Spotify, if you listen on Spotify, I can add like a question and a poll, or one or the other, or both. So maybe I'll add a question like, oh, what did you think of this? And nobody answers, but maybe give us a little answer, or just give us if I put in the poll, what's your favorite Tyler project? Give us a little vote, you know, some kind of
engagement.
Engagement. Engage with us, you know. We want to engage with you.
Engage those juicy algorithms and all that.
Engage those algorithms. Yeah, you can find us on, as mentioned, Spotify, iTunes, Amazon, all the various podcasting apps and websites that are out there, whichever one you particularly enjoy. We also post little video versions of these to YouTube, and I try to keep our SoundCloud updated. I think that's everything. We're going to try and line up a guest for the next episode, but we'll see how that goes. Wonderful. All right, I think we can call it there.
Amazing.
What you do later? I wanted you to get close to me. I think it's quite amazing. You keep on adding up, but your brother's going down like he's supposed to be. Hey, escalator, look at all those waiters diving around the sky like an apostrophe. I think it's quite amazing that you might break the look, but also you're a wonder in your own way.
also heavy.